Welcome to the Centre for Optimism's The Better Normal. We believe people want to lock in the benefits of what they learnt during the COVID lockdown and are rejecting the idea of a return to normal or a nebulous new normal. What they want is to build their own better normal. Hi, Victor Purton here. This is the Centre for Optimism, and today may be the first in a series on the better normal. Our chairman, Robert Masters, has coined the phrase. We've just done a global survey over the weekend, 500 responses, 70% of people don't want to give away the better practices that they've learnt and adopted during the COVID shutdown. So it's a welcome to Rob Masters. Hello, Rob.
Thank you, Victor. Welcome, everyone.
Hello, Catherine.
Hi, Victor. Nice to be here.
Welcome back to the Antipodes, Paul Bailey.
Thank you, Victor. Very much appreciate it, and great to be here on your show today.
And Mark Matthews, welcome.
Hello, Victor. It's fabulous to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And as always in a Centre for Optimism event, our first question is, what makes you optimistic? Robert Masters, what makes you optimistic?
Well, I've always been an optimistic person, Victor, but I think the survey results of the weekend, 550 plus people, all expressing various degrees of optimism for the future, that makes me optimistic.
Catherine Brown, what makes you optimistic?
Well, in our role at the foundation and probably in my life generally, I've noticed that whenever there's a big social or environmental challenge, there always seems to be people who want to address it. So we're never short of people with good ideas and a lot of energy. So I feel very optimistic.
Paul Bailey, what's making you optimistic?
My children make me optimistic. But more than that, as you know, I come out of a recovery and development, particularly after natural disasters, and I've seen firsthand how people can deal with significant change and come back positively and with hope and fortitude and develop their own future. And I've seen that many times, and that makes me eternally optimistic.
And Mark Matthews, what makes you optimistic?
Thanks, Victor. I've always been an optimistic person, like Robert. But right now, I see opportunity impossible that's matched with a critical need and the human capital and tools to be able to solve that. And that's what really makes me optimistic right now.
And Eloise Grace, what makes you optimistic?
All right, hi. Well, just the youth of today makes me optimistic, just that they're so versatile and able to adapt to change, like, for example, what's been happening in the past few months, because they are our future at the end of the day, and they are the ones who are going to be around the longest to, relay what's been going on and how they've coped with that, and that's also made them more resilient for the future.
So, Robert Masters, Chairman of the Centre for Optimism, tell us about the better normal.
Thank you, Victor. And well, I think this really emanated out of a discussion that Victor and I had when we were seeing, principally through the media, but through our own activities, that more and more people were actually engaged in trying to bring about change as far as the restrictions that were put on them, and they were adapting accordingly. So there was a whole change in society taking place. And we thought, if we take, which Paul's familiar with, the crisis management scenario, I started to look at that because of my background in a lot of that area. And the return to normal, which is in a phase 4 of the crisis management strategy, I'll ask Victor to bring that up in a second. But that started to get our thinking going as to, well, we don't want to return to normal. And the work that we've been doing highlights that. So, Victor, if you just put up those slides, I'll take you through about 5 slides, and then we can open it up for the others to make their comments. So we're basically saying that we can have a better normal, and the survey that Victor just referred to over the weekend, where we got over 500 responses, highlights that people don't want to return to normal. So if I go into the next slide, Victor, on those that are familiar with a crisis scenario situation, we had the event, which was principally the COVID-19 event and how that escalated. And in particular, we're talking here about Australia, and the response was, I think, was very good. You could say it wasn't quick enough, but for the majority of people, we did an extremely good job, and we were pretty timely as far as that is concerned. So we're in that phase, or we're coming out of that phase now, and Victor and I have discussed where are companies, where is government going in this so-called recovery phase, and many of you are seeing that now in the way restrictions are being lifted. So we went from there as to, well, we know what and where and who and everything like that. And so we've addressed the why situation, but now we're into the how. Where do we actually go from with this how situation? So what we looked at here was, if we move into the next slide, Victor, I'll show you what our things are. So how can we actually do this better? And we know people want to have it better, and we know there are two key elements as far as this how is concerned. And the two are leadership and communication. And under leadership, there are a number of subsets that have to be addressed. Now, the Prime Minister highlighted at the weekend in the newspapers when he was referring to a new national cabinet of all of Australia. And you have to bear in mind that we have sovereign states, so they have their own boundaries and they have their own responsibilities. But under this new norm, so to speak, that everyone is talking about, he is highlighting that we can have a better normal. And basically through policies, re-looking at those, the structures of the way we operate, and also the culture of the society. And Victor and I have discussed that, and the survey highlights that there is a changing culture. But we can't do it through government alone. We have to look at business, and where does business come into this, and what role are they playing? And then when we look at Catherine and the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation, where does community sit in this? And Catherine will talk a little bit more about that, and she's already coined the phrase, which I think is a marvellous phrase, and that's build back better. So she was ahead of us in putting that forward. So she's obviously addressed where the community needs to have a role. And then we can't escape the personal side of everything. So, and the survey that we've done at the weekend highlights a number of key personal things that people have highlighted as to where they want to see the future going. And then there's communication. And Eloise, being a journalist and a lawyer by background, we need to look at how we're actually going to communicate in this, and what is the role of the media in this whole thing. So if we move out of those two areas and just look at leadership for a start, leadership today is being talked about time and time again. And those of you who are familiar with Australia, leadership has been a very questionable issue from the political point of view, as well as captains of industry's perspective. There has been a big loss of trust as far as leadership is concerned. And now we're in a stage where everyone is trying to rebuild that. But for leadership to achieve its real purpose, there are a number of things that started to emerge. And one was this bounded optimism, which was principally that you have to embrace everyone in your decision-making processes. In other words, it's not you alone, and therefore you have to rely on a network, a teamwork approach, and therefore don't be or embrace the old hierarchical structure of command and obey. So it's a teamwork. You're not showing weakness, actually you're showing decisiveness. And that allows you to actually get up in front of people and be decisive in the way you're actually delivering your various policies and other initiatives that the organisation is taking. It's not a weakness at all these days. So people are being seen to be decisive. But the nice thing about it also is that as part of that, people are actually accepting that you can make mistakes. So it's a very, very strong component of leadership today. But the final one is empathy. And in Australia, but also you could say in New Zealand, where empathy by leaders has been shown to be a standout quality. People want to actually hear from leaders and see leaders actually embracing some of the initiatives of their own people, but also reaching out to the community and actually showing understanding of what they're actually going through. So you're seeing that come through more and more as far as the leaders are concerned. And if we move from there into communication, communication from my point of view, and I come from a journalistic background like Eloise, we have to base it today on realistic outlooks. You know, the journalism that we are faced with, and I'm very critical of that today, is that, you know, truth no longer has its own meaning. Facts no longer have their own meaning. So we're in this situation where we've got this Tower of Babylon actually taking place from a media perspective. How do you actually know what is the truth? How do you actually know what are the facts? So journalism has a big role to play in this whole thing, but so do communicators. And communicators are the ones that are often actually putting forward the words for the leaders. So we have to ensure that truth has its own standing now, and facts are actually what people actually start to believe in. So therefore, communication is the connector. And that's why we put this global space picture, because if we don't have connection with the community and with our stakeholders, we'll lose what we're trying to achieve. And that leads me to the final phrase or statement as to what Victor and I have been talking about for a long time, that realistic optimism, or the outlooks that you convey from leaders and the way you actually communicate, has a powerful effect on people, and that can inspire them to support initiatives that organisations, that are governments that are doing. And so that's really the essence of what we're actually been talking about here. It's leadership, it's communication, but it's bringing about this, not the so-called new norm that people are talking about, but we're saying they want the better normal. So that's where we're coming from. And I think, Victor, it probably is a good segue into Catherine in looking at where she sits and how she perceives matters from a community point of view, and the work that the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation has done. Catherine is the CEO of the foundation, and she's done a remarkable job in actually building this into a multi-million-dollar foundation, and the initiatives that the foundation does today are quite outstanding, from the homeless side of the communities right through to the environment and to the arts. So, Catherine, I'll hand it over to you and let you tell people where the community sits in this whole equation.
Okay, well, we're a community foundation. In fact, we're the largest community foundation in Australia, so that gives me a slightly different perspective than some of the other foundations. But first of all, it was interesting, Rob, to see your disaster management diagram, because that's actually how we have a disaster response policy, and we apply that whenever there's a disaster. So whether it was the Black Summer, bushfires, or now it's COVID-19, that's how we think as well. So we look at immediate relief, and then we look at recovery, and later, and also preparedness. So before this crisis, we've been actually doing a lot about heat waves and preparing people for that sort of natural disaster. But in fact, we've now obviously had to respond to the bushfires and now to COVID-19. But in terms of the community and the not-for-profit sector, I think I might just talk about it all together. I think, first of all, the way not-for-profit organisations and community organisations have responded to COVID-19 has been quite amazing. We made nearly $1 million of rapid response grants very quickly in March, sort of April, really to help organisations scale up who already had services that were very needed. And the way Food Bank and Justice Connect, which is a legal service that does a lot of homeless law and so on, and there's many other examples I could give you, and some of the digital platforms that were able to sort of scale up, like Ask Izzy and Gather My Crew. I think it just shows that not-for-profit, the leaders in the not-for-profit and community sector have a really amazing ability to be quite agile and quite innovative. And that's certainly what we fund normally, is we have an innovation grants round as well. And then I think the other thing I've really noticed is the collaboration. So there've been some really fast-moving collaborations between, say, 10 social enterprises all coming together who all work on different elements of food security, all connecting and setting up their own Moving Feast initiative so that they actually generate their own income and ensure their own survival, but are also responding to the food issues that came from the pandemic. So, but they're two things I've really noticed, and I think the ability to be, I think often the not-for-profit sector is forgotten. So sometimes, you know, we have big innovation things in Australia, but no one thinks about the not-for-profit sector. But that's actually a bit of a passion of mine, that we are really very innovative, and we fund a lot of testing of new ideas and research and sort of incubating new service models. And I would hope that what comes out of this crisis is that we never think about government and business without thinking about the not-for-profit sector and how much knowledge and expertise and innovation is in the sector. And particularly now that we're going to face, as we start to recover, a lot of economic challenges. There's many organisations who understand homelessness and unemployment incredibly well across so many different vulnerable groups. So to use all that expertise, I think, is important. And then I think also to use the stimulus funding, I suppose this is what there's a lot of difficult things we're going to have to address, but if we can kind of seize the moment and say, the stimulus funding, why can't we solve some of the really tough issues Australia faces, such as the lack of supply of affordable housing? Why can't all, you know, we've got quite a number of projects with plans underway and almost, you know, shovel ready. Why can't they all be sort of fast-tracked and we get a lot more affordable housing, create employment and address that really underlying problem? And the same would go for our climate transition. You know, why can't we do a lot more energy efficiency on all our buildings, including our community and social housing? And why can't we employ young people in the renewable energy industry? And I mean, Ross Garno gave a wonderful talk at the Smart Energy Council, which was a webinar series we funded, on his superpower book, you know, what the renewable energy superpower that Australia can be. You know, that can address employment, it can help climate transition. There's so many wins in all of this. I think we should seize the moment. And I think the not-for-profit sector is perhaps the unsung hero of Australia. So it'd be really fantastic if we can all sort of get sectors working really closely together and use all our different strengths. And maybe my last point would be even in terms of financing, I think it's starting. I'm on the Social Impact Investing Task Force in Australia, and we're in technical hibernation at the moment, but we're coming out again soon. But, you know, the idea of being able to use capital in different ways to help the not-for-profit sector function even better, and for social enterprises to be able to be funded in different ways, and impact investing, you know, these are all opportunities we have, and some other countries are further ahead than we are. There's no reason we can't address a lot of this as we come out.
Thanks for that, Catherine. I think there is a whole new thinking taking place, and people are seeing those opportunities, and it's probably a good segue into Paul, because Paul was the CEO of the Virgin Island reconstruction, but he was also a parliamentary secretary to the Fijian Ministry of Infrastructure and Transport, and so from that, it's really in a rebuild mode that Paul has this background, and how does that transpire into this new thinking that's taking place? So, Paul, what are your thoughts as far as community involvement, and really, Catherine, what she was talking about is infrastructure funding, but in the broader aspects of where we're at now, and how do you see it taking place?
Yeah, very good comments that Catherine's making. I've been accused of being a hurricane chaser because I took up my job in Fiji 4 days before this huge Category 5 cyclone, Tropical Winston, hit. And just to give people the idea, we had 40,000 homes destroyed, 402 schools either destroyed or damaged, just to give you an idea. Only had 42 deaths, and we were very lucky in that. That was in Fiji, across the whole of Fiji. And then as you point out, it went to the British Virgin Islands, which were hit by, as was a lot of that area, the US Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, hit by these 2 Category 5 hurricanes, Irma and Maria, for those people in this United States will know what I'm talking about very well. In Fiji, I was running a Ministry of Infrastructure and Transport. So we were faced with having to rebuild the whole of the territory. So we had roads smashed out. But in dealing with that, we had to look at how we build back long-term resilience if I use the roading example, we had to build back and say, well, look, like a lot of island states, roads are always around the coast. So that you're going to have more of these events in the future. So it wasn't just good enough to build back the roads, but we had to think about, okay, what happens when the next hurricane or cyclone comes? How do you build resilience into your infrastructure? And we did that primarily through really talking to our partners in the way that we did our business. So, and we took the same approach in the British Virgin Islands. When you're, and by the way, I should note, I'm a former investment banker, so I've just flipped over into government side. But in government, we all tend to assume that we know more than we do. And what most people, most organisations in government make the mistake repeatedly is thinking they know the answer. And when we went into the BVI, really smashed up, I think it was US $3.6 billion worth of damage. It was a lot of money. We spent a lot of time in the communities. And again, just playing back to Catherine, listening to the communities and what they wanted and what was important to them. Now, the first project that we did in the BVI, and when we got this organisation set up under its own legislation, so it had independence, it's funded mostly by the UK government, but also by the local government, BVI government. In our discussions with the communities, what became, and this is a really good example, what was really important to them was, in this case, was to rebuild the sports facilities and stadium. And people said, why did you start there? Well, actually, when you have a community, or in this case, a whole country, completely devastated. And they, the one thing they all did in the hurricane or cyclone, everyone can share stories about where they spent the time during the hurricane or whatever had happened. But they had all these young people available and they didn't know what to do with them. The schools weren't available. They were all smashed. So sports is a really important thing. So in the BVI, they have overrepresented in high-level athletics and basketball. And those young boys and girls coming out of school wanting to get their US scholarships to US universities, they needed a track and sports facilities to be able to get that. And they had to travel. They had to go to Puerto Rico. They had to go further afield. So that's what the community wanted. So the whole idea about how you do back recovery, and I don't talk about recovery anymore. I talk about recovery and development. You can't think about recovery without development, without what we're talking about today, building a better future. When you do the roads or whatever, or do an infrastructure, be it hard infrastructure or a soft one. So we use the experience of our schools in the BVI were all teacher-based, no internet. So when we were starting to build the roads, we just released several construction contracts, that we laid fibre so that we could actually get fibre into the schools so that then we could talk around how we could deliver new education using modern technology. Now, if we hadn't had the example of, haven't had to do that because all the power poles were knocked over and we had to bury the lines, then we had this wonderful opportunity to do things like that and to build a new economy, a new world for people. And, you know, COVID is forcing us to do that. We've been forced to stay home. We haven't had the calamity of smashed up events, but we are being forced to do and think about things quite differently. That's what's so exciting about where we are now. So I might just leave it there. I don't want to hog the time.
No, thanks for that, Paul. I think it's very interesting in what Mark has actually been doing, because he has, through his organisation, which is Business for Development, been working in the Pacific, but also in Africa and the Philippines, etc. From that point of view, and they've been building in the, principally, I assume, Mark, in the primary industry sector, but it's building people, building nations, and building industry. So, Mark, look forward to your views on this.
Thanks very much, Robert. And I really found it refreshing to hear the commentary both from Catherine and Paul. Paul, particularly, I've been working in economic development, not just in a rural sector, but also in a regional environment for many years, both here in Australia and also in the Pacific. I spent a long time in Fiji, and seeing the work around how you can leverage the investment in economic development for really enterprise and also to solve the problems. We hear of this major infrastructure investment in Australia that's being touted by our Prime Minister. I cross my fingers and hope it's not a road. Really, it should be, we should be looking at the issues around social housing. That's the construction sector. That provides the jobs. That solves the problems. We should look at our connectivity and within our cities. The most congested or pathways at the moment in Melbourne are the cycleways, not the actual roads themselves. Should we be thinking about developing those for the future? But certainly in an agricultural sense, it's very much about talking with the community about what they see as important. Too many well-meaning development organisation professionals come into countries with a perception of what they need to do to solve the local problem, to match the environment outside of their environment. And often the problems are local, the solutions are local, and the people who are going to have to implement them are also local as well too. I think we have a real opportunity here not to just restore like for like, but to regenerate elements of our society, of our enterprise, to have a much more inclusive society. We see the disparity just growing wider and wider. We need to ensure that as the work that we do around our innovation keeps a strong social net so that we don't lose people through that. There will be those at the forefront who will grasp this and see this as opportunity, and I'm sure the panel around us see this as a really opportunistic time for change. There'll be many who will be fearful of the change and not only resistant to the change, but also work against that change, and will fundamentally, their whole systems around themselves will potentially collapse. We need to ensure that we have the compassion as a society to carry forward everybody inclusively as part of that work. I think.
Thanks for that, Mark. I think it's interesting that all three of you have talked about the importance of actually talking and listening to communities and responding to communities, as opposed to the hierarchical system that we've often had in the past, and as Paul actually highlighted, where the bureaucracy or government departments often think they know all the answers. So it's coming from the bottom up more than from the top down. And I think that leads me to Eloise, being a journalist and the intermediary or the connector in many of these types of things. I mean, today we've really been focused on fake news, allegations left, right and centre, and the gotcha moments of journalists. And we even had it with one of the ABC journalists last night, trying to catch a minister out and getting him to apologise for some of the issues that the government has no doubt created. But journalism today has an important role to play. But do you think it's actually fulfilling its role as far as what we've just heard?
Yeah, look, first, journalists do have a very important role. They have to be accountable. Yeah, really, their job is to report the facts, not to, state opinions on what may or may not be taking place. Yeah, I guess traditionally, if a politician doesn't answer the way you want them to, often a journalist will ask over and over again. I'm not sure if they're trying to trick them out or if they're trying to get a different version or to get the politician to say more things. But yeah, that's just, I guess, been quite sort of, I guess there's quite a pushy nature to the job, or traditionally there has been. And I guess that's kind of what you're taught as well when you're training on the job a lot of the time is, if you don't think you've got the answer yet, keep sort of probing. Yeah, look, I think today, especially with what's going on all around the world, it's just really important that, everybody's really, saying it's truthfully what's going on. And that also relates with social media as well, if you're sharing things. And accuracy is very important. And yeah, that's the main things that we need to focus on, and also being honest as well.
Yeah. So do you, whilst you're saying that journalists being honest on that, but do you see there is division within the media as far as their reporting is concerned? I mean, we always used to talk about balanced journalism, so everyone has a view and that is reported. But often there are slants being put on stories these days, which is the journalist's view of things as opposed to what was actually said.
Yeah, I definitely think we need to focus on, look, in terms of my actual opinion on that, I don't actually have a strong opinion on that, but I definitely agree with you that it needs to go back to having both sides of the story being told, and all available options. If you're reporting on something that's important, always go to the other side. You're going to always get the opposition's their viewpoint as well. Otherwise, as you said, it's very, very, it's not fair, it's not accurate. You're not getting a balanced story.
Yes, I think society, and as I said earlier, society overall wants to restore trust in the printed or the spoken word that they hear through the media, but that trust factor to me is still not there from a journalistic point of view, and that makes it difficult from a leadership aspect as well. And as you rightly say, journalists have to probe and put leaders under the microscope if they're not going to respond accordingly and highlight the mistakes. But we've found in the last few months and the work that we've been doing on leadership, that the community is actually understanding of leaders who actually admit that a mistake has been made, but they're actually embracing and reflecting on other people who have been involved in those decision making. So they're prepared to correct, but as long as they stand by it and journalists report it accordingly, I think community would benefit from that. Do you see a change taking place, or do you see it still very much in a negative way?
I have not seen a great deal of change, in the last few years. Yeah, one of the first things I learned was, always look for a gee whiz factor, so to introduce a story. So yeah, I guess journalists are still going in with that framework in mind that, let's find the gee whiz factor. And of course, if you're talking about journalism, you're talking about TV often. I mean, there's all the other various mediums as well. But yeah, then they have ratings to play on as well. You've got, there's all these financials and other things come into play. So, but at the end of the day, if you're reporting on, the news, and you want it to be accurate, you want to get both sides of the story. And that's really a journalist's sort of duty to the public. And yeah, also, to the politicians, if you're, interviewing one, go and get the other side's viewpoint as well, and make sure everybody has their own say. So that's actually a full story, and it's not just half a story.
Mm. Yeah, look, I think it's interesting from all our participants are concerned as to exactly how we're actually going to embrace this better normal. And it would be good to see that the journalistic side is actually on board with exactly how we can actually achieve this. So it's the how part, as to what I was saying very, very much earlier. And just listening to Paul and Mark and Catherine, the journalistic side of it actually becomes an important part of that as well. So Victor, maybe we should just open the session up to questions from other participants.
I'd take Kerry, if that's all right, first, because Kerry's got a comment on normal, the new normal, and the variations we'll see. Kerry, what did you have to say, and what did you want to ask the panelists?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for your talks. Something that I've been challenging the past few months is the use of the word normal. So I was very interested, even though you've got a positive connotation on it. Another word is recovery, because both of those indicate we're trying to go back to usual. And what is the norm anyway? So my question is around, is it possible? Is it feasible? Can we reframe the conversation to focus on positive change, innovation? Do you think we can change this community conversation?
Paul, what's your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, and a very good question. Look, there's no such thing as another norm, a new normal. It is a new whatever, and whether it's environmental, everything we should be doing has a community aspect to it. It has an environmental aspect to it. It has as well as an economic aspect to it. So what we're talking about is how do we keep going on the progress on a pathway? It's just that these opportunities come along, and I call them as opportunities rather than as crises, if you notice, because they are opportunities for communities and nations to redefine themselves and to think about things in a different way. And they're very helpful for doing that. They're very transformative if you take the opportunity. And one of the key things that gets lost and forgotten about and it underscores everything you do when you're talking about transformation, is the role of capacity building. In our case, we had it enshrined in our legislation that not only would we recover better, stronger, greener, and the likes, but that we would also do capacity building. And every single thing we introduced had a capacity building flavour, more than a flavour, a key ingredient about how do we do this. So if we want to put green infrastructure in, how do we develop the young people to have the skills and experience to do that sort of stuff?
Well, that's very much in line with where Catherine's coming from the community and the not-for-profit sector, isn't it, Catherine?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in our foundation, we fund capacity building a lot alongside innovation. I agree we don't want to just recover. We actually want to go to something even better. And I think when we think about just the last comment about journalists and TV and wanting the gee whiz, wouldn't it be great if the gee whiz was actually the vision of what Australia could be, and other countries on this call, and so inspiring that people go, yeah, we see that. I mean, when we had this Smart Energy Council webinar a couple of weeks ago, we just supported it, but as part of our climate transition work, it was so inspiring. They ended up having 4 ministers for energy from around Australia and the Queensland Premier and Ross Garno and Anna Scarbeck, all sort of key people in climate in Australia. And they had 3,000 people online. So I think once people start to see what's possible, it really is a gee whiz moment. And then completely you need capacity building, and you need the plan of how we get people educated into the right fields so we can transition. And I mean, just one other point I thought before was the way New Zealand has now got its 5 different measures. So it's got GDP and other indicators. And I think that's a kind of quite inspiring approach too. So, I mean, there's lots for us to think about. We want to do more than recover.
I wonder if, Rosemary, you had some really interesting comments on a range of issues.
Victor, I always have interesting comments. I myself on that, or not keeping quiet. I actually think we need to stop using the word back, we can never go back, and I for one actually don't want to go back. I'm looking forward to going somewhere new. I want to pick up on the community aspect of it, because community is probably the heaviest lifter in every part of every community, regardless of where you are in the world. The community people lead, even though they don't think they're doing that. They're the ones who can actually tell you where the need is. They're the ones that actually can tell you where the resources are. And some of those resources are pretty far-fetched out there, but they know that they work. And the community grassroots people will also tell you where the capacity is. So we need new voices at the table, because, as I wrote, it's too easy to fall back into the overworn, accepted comfort zone of the voices that were already there. For those of you who don't know, I represent a small community in Australia. At last count, there was about 150 million of us. Just a small community of injured workers who are never asked, what can we do? What can we offer? Where can we help? I actually heard a news article this morning saying that a lot of the issues in the aged care industry are caused by the inability of understaffing. And yet I have injured workers who are nurses who have nowhere to turn up for work, and nobody's asked us, what can we do to help? So I think it's time that the community actually stepped back and said, there's more voices to be heard. Let's hear all of the voices. Let's hear all of the ways forward. Let's actually put the needs and the resources together. I actually wrote a program. Well, I'm in the process of writing it. I have no idea where I'm going to put it or what I'm going to do with it. But it's a program that actually pulls all the needs, all the resources, and all the capabilities onto one A4 piece of paper. That's how simple it will be.
Brilliant. Mark, do you reckon you see a lot of communities, that don't have voices in government across the Pacific? How have, listening to Rosemary and, injured workers amongst others, how did you go on bringing new communities into the development space in the Philippines and Papua New Guinea and elsewhere?
In a post-crisis situation, and some of our work actually evolves as the organisations that help build economic development post a crisis themselves. What I saw often enough was fabulous collaborations between individuals during a time of crisis. When everything got back to whatever it was, normal or the future, everyone went, okay, that's it, dust it off, we just go back to where we are. We need to make sure that there's a level of stickiness around that. And that's our fundamental work in creating that ecosystem of support. We can't do it together. The community is powerful, but there's a stakeholder group which incorporates all of those, the government, business, and the community, their stakeholders. You need to develop an ecosystem of support to drive it forward.
Any of the other, Paul, what did you have the same experience in the Virgin Islands?
Absolutely. What Mark is saying is, totally in line with the way we've always sort of thought about it. I think, without that, you just get out of whack with what people really want. And then you have the problem of, that's where your communication goes all wrong. And then you find yourself actually having to work against the public comments start to work against you, and it can quickly unravel the whole thing that you're trying to achieve. So, the importance of communication and all of this stuff, and always checking back, both at a personal level and within groups, but also through the media about what's happening and how you're doing it. And this is where this whole discussion that we're having here about the importance of media becomes so important. And if they don't understand what you're doing, you've got to invest the time into it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they will agree with what you're doing. And nobody will always anyway, but you don't worry about that. You just need to be clear about what you're trying to achieve and let the message get out there, let the debate happen, let the feedback come back. And that's why that's why the community thing is such an important element of all of this.
And Eloise, I mean, as well as being a journalist, you are a part owner of a new media company that gives voice to anyone with an iPhone. What are you saying about those voices and that Rosemary talks about so ably?
What am I saying about the voices?
Yeah, just, I mean, you've always been very good at bringing, diverse groups into your reporting, but you've also got this incredible media platform now that you and your husband have built.
Yep. Yeah, well, yeah, we've seen emergency services using the software quite heavily to, get out to, dramatic events and get their message out both to the media and also to other people within the organisations. Yeah, we've just had generally people, businesses using it, individuals. Yeah, and also mainstream big media companies using it as well and going out to do basic reporting and using it in regional areas largely as well. So getting to, areas where perhaps the mainstream journalists may not get to because it's very easy, you don't need a whole crew. So yeah, I guess it's, getting a few more stories out there, which is good, and getting to more areas as well.
Kylie Hargraves. Kylie was on with us last week. She is the chairman of the Australian Ocean Energy Group and left with nearly 100 card-carrying supporters. So you wanted to make a couple of points, Kylie.
Thanks so much. Thanks very much, Robert, Mark, Paul, and Catherine and Eloise. My question's probably a bit more for Catherine, just because I also work in the not-for-profit sector, and one of the things it is seen, I think, in the COVID response, how quickly people can actually respond, and there's nothing like sort of a burning platform to get people to be, sort of focused and creative. My question, though, for the not-for-profit centre is, is there anything structurally we can do to reinforce that collaboration going forward? Because my concern is that once the urgency has gone, there's a tendency to go back to trying to protect the funds for your particular cause rather than necessarily collaborating across the not-for-profit sector. So is there something structurally we can do to support that collaboration that we've seen, which has been so wonderful?
Yeah, very good question. Might start by saying, I think if we can hold on to some of the collaborations that have formed, it's a little bit like what Mark was just talking about. You don't want to lose them, you want them to continue. And I think people actually are starting to change the way they work. So it's incredible how people are working across different sectors. And I mean, I even think of, energy efficiency, and we've now got CHIA, which is Community Housing Industry Association, working with Renew, which is, energy efficiency. And we brought them together, and now they've got projects, and they've got the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence, and all, just growing. And I think the more the different not-for-profits understand that they can actually be more, in a way, more resilient through working together, the better it will be. And we certainly fund collaborations and networks. That's been something in the capacity building part of our granting we're really aware of. I think it's not a kind of, sexy part of philanthropy, but in a way it's the sort of community, social infrastructure almost that makes a massive difference. So I think it'd be great if even in some of the solutions that people understand, you actually need to put money into collaborations and networks to keep building those. It doesn't just happen, especially the not-for-profit sector. The people are pretty thinly resourced sometimes.
I wonder if I can ask Chris Norman, are you online?
Hi, Victor, how are you?
Excellent, good to see you. The beard is a new addition to post-COVID life.
Yeah, that's right. This is isolation. Yeah, isolation life. So thanks, guys. I'm really enjoying your seminar series, and it's good to see everybody on the system today. My question is around the frustration I have working in the conservation and land management space around the lack of investment in a green and blue economic recovery to COVID. So Paul mentioned it earlier, But we made a pitch to the Prime Minister 3 weeks ago for a $4 billion environmental employment program to employ 24,000 people across Australia to build capacity, to create an environment for the future. Our environment is under extreme pressure and we're trying to build resilient systems. But yet the Prime Minister comes out and government comes out last week and more roads, more buildings. So I guess I'm interested in your view about how do we get this on the agenda, that this is the time to create a legacy for future generations by investing in environmental programs.
Well, Robert Masters, I think that's your space.
It's a very good question, Chris. I really think this is where governments have got to start to listen, as opposed to think that they know it all. And just listening to everyone here, you know, from the grassroots up, the voices are actually starting to accumulate. And so this is where politicians, but also government advisors and departments have to start to listen. And it's a bit like what Kylie has been doing in her energy sector there, and others, and probably Mark as well. It's a matter of exactly what is the case you're putting forward and what are the benefits from a policy point of view. Now, everyone actually highlights those in the submissions you made, but it's a matter of getting that traction, as you say, for a legacy. And this is what we're basically saying now, that if the governments are starting to come into a listening mode, as opposed to do it the way I want to do it mode, I think we will achieve change. It's their opportunity to do it. And as a number of people are actually saying, it's to build this better future as far as Australia is concerned. And maybe, Victor, we should drop the word normal and talk about a better future, but it's got to be sustainable. And that's the essence of what we're actually trying to achieve here. So,
can I ask, Chris, is that the proposal that was developed through the Pew Charitable Trust?
That's correct, Catherine. Yeah, so for others, there's about 70 of us involved. I'm very heavily involved in it, but yeah. So and New Zealand made a release 2 weeks ago, $1.1 billion for 7,000 employees. So other countries are doing it, but Australia is not.
No, I've seen the presentation because I'm on the board of the Australian Environmental Grant Makers Network, and they presented it. And I think it's brilliant, and I've been sending it everywhere. I think we just need to make sure those really good ideas get support. I mean, that is a win-win. I mean, that's employment and environment. I mean, you'd have to consider it. Yeah.
If the Centre for Optimism can fall behind you, because Chris, did a fantastic job in northeastern Victoria around catchments, and he's now in Queensland, and so if we can fall in, Kylie, won a whole lot of supporters to her cause. So I think let's have a bit of a think, Rob, about the best way of being able to fall in behind this submission that Catherine's endorsed and Chris is so passionate about. So I think that's some work for us to do, to fall in behind you on that. Noreen, you had a comment to make and a question to ask?
Yes, hi everyone. This is a question for all the panelists, please. As we do head into a better normal or a better future, what is the one ingredient that all of you would want excluded from the better normal? And what is the one ingredient that you would like included in the better normal?
Who wants to go first?
Can I start? And I'll make it very easy. Thank you very much. The one ingredient that I want is abundant optimism. The one ingredient I want to leave behind is abject negativity.
Oh, love it. Thank you, Mark.
Paul?
Yeah, I think it has to be, as Mark said, I think, what we're doing is providing the opportunity for hope. And everything we're doing now is about providing an opportunity for people to rebuild their businesses if they've lost them, to be able to go on and to create new opportunities, whether it's in the housing sector or whatever. So it's about hope. We're creating hope. And the thing that we want to forget is, and we want to drop, is the kind of the viewpoint that what we had was okay. We need to consistently challenge ourselves about what could be, not what was.
Brilliant. Eloise?
I think we need to work more together, collaborate, communicate, and less focusing on, greed and self-centeredness. So more working together as opposed to just working for yourself.
Catherine?
I'd like to move away from inequality of opportunity. I think, that's really, Australia's been famous for being equal, and we have to really protect that and really try very hard, because I think young people and women are going to be particularly affected. So we really have to make sure we have some good new opportunities. In terms of included, well, a just transition. I mean, that's what I would like. Yeah. That's it. That's a long. That's a talk in itself.
It is. No, we will do that. I think there's a demand for that, Rob.
We can't go back to the normal. It didn't work. It's as simple as that. And people have moved on from what was normal. So they don't want it anymore. So it's now, how do we actually embrace the new thinking of the people and embrace it with optimism, but realistic optimism. And as I said at the start, it needs to have leadership, and it also needs to have strong communication base to exactly how we're going to get this out.
So look, we've got 5 minutes left and 5 interesting people. So what I thought we might do, if the panelists are happy, I'll get Scott, Sally, Susan, Sam and April to sort of have a minute each. And then each of you panelists to do your final statement. And then Rob, you do the thank you. And as always, we can have a little gossip for anyone who wants to stay online afterwards. So Scott, are you ready?
Yeah, I've probably just got a question for the journalists within the group. I'm pretty concerned, or observed the move from journalism to commentary and etc. And I appreciate your comment about giving both sides of the stories. But when do you draw the line between giving both sides of the story and giving the air to lack of knowledge? The COVID virus being forced by or caused by 5G networks, non-science facts being put out, and just people who are self-seeking opportunists to create a noise.
So Rob and Eloise, if you can hold that thought. Sally Arnold.
I'm loving this conversation about media, trust and communication, because that's my space. But look, I'm a huge advocate for the newsrooms. I think they're doing an amazing job. We're actually seeing a huge increase in the move back to those trusted mastheads that have been institutional. And that even though these are international brands, they have a big presence in Australia and a big follow-up. So, they're responsible for news, facts, analysis, and opinions. And our leaders absolutely need those. Like within our cities, they need them. But we need to have a look at, there's concern about what's going on. 100, mastheads gone from the communities. Optimistically, top 10 brands in Australia last week in Roy Morgan's one media brand, which is the ABC. So I think we need to see some more money going to the ABC because they've got a bigger job that they need to do. But, people need to not be so lazy, pick up the news. Twitter and Facebook are not newsrooms. They don't have newsrooms. They're just platforms, right? So people have to just take a little bit more responsibility. And that's up to the media to help them to start getting on board with that too.
Great point. Eloise has got to go. She's got a family responsibility. So a final comment, Eloise? No, she's disappeared, but no, she had an important family obligation. It's great she could join us for an hour. Susan.
Okay, and I am that person on the call with the cat, who's incidentally is called Kerry O'Brien because he's a ginger. I actually wanted to make a comment around some organisations have been well prepared and have been able to shift their business models quite quickly in response to changing staff demands, changing customer demands. Other companies have really struggled to change. So everything around me has changed and I'm not working. As we move into what is hopefully a very different future and take advantage of some of the lessons, those who have really struggled are the ones who are more likely to want to return to what they call the normal. So we're going to have that real tension. How do we actually showcase and try and take advantage of the ones that have moved really well without isolating or inadvertently making defensive the companies that have really, really struggled and will struggle potentially in a different future?
Brilliant, brilliant. Sam, last comment, and then we'll go back to the panelists, both with that comment of Scott and Susan. Sam, what did you want to say?
Okay, how are we going there? My comment is that most of all the discussions are very city orientated, and we talk about community and rebuilding things, but it seems that the education of our disconnect between the land and what our impact is, which a lot of breakout groups and environmentalists talk about, you know, like they're screaming in the wind. It seems that a sort of more formal understanding of our impact and would make it easier for people like Kylie and various people that are trying to put initiatives in if children particularly were actually taken out into the land a bit more and given more exposure to that. And I'm just wondering for people that are in the rebuilding area, like you, Paul, in small communities, how much, you know, whilst young people want to move forward into the digital age, how much of the reality of the land and the rural sector and what people are trying to do in very isolated ways is making any headway in, you know, developing this part of it?
Oh, brilliant question, Sam. A great way to end up. We've reached the hour point, so I think if everyone's happy, we'll go around the panel to ask for their final comments, and in particular, if you can address those last 3 points from Susan, Sam, and Scott, that would be super if at least some of you do. So who will we start with? Catherine?
I can see some very nice connections between what Sam just said and Chris's proposal to do with employment and conservation. So I think there's definitely some good connections there. It's a lot to say. My last thing would be just, you know, if we could only show people the vision of what is possible and then enable people to let go of what we have had that may not have worked and just carry forward what is working, it'll be easier for people to change. I mean, we have to sort of allow people to think a bit more flexibly, because I think, yeah, otherwise we could get stuck and not move forward into a better future.
Brilliant. Paul?
That last question is very interesting. I'll tell you from my experience, and if I just quote from Fiji, for example, after Tropical Cyclone Winston, it took us, in some cases, 10 days or more to cut into some of these really isolated villages. And in those cases, what we found when we turned up, thinking they would all be in huge strife, is in fact that they had got on and rebuilt their villages, and they were all sitting there, and we turned up with food and they said, oh, thanks very much, we don't really need it, but we'll have it. What I noticed, so the further you get away from government, often the stronger the communities, the more resilient the communities. And I've seen that in lots and lots of different places in the world. The second thing is, I'm living in quite a provincial part of New Zealand. And I just tell you, in the last few weeks, I'm helping some councils here, just with their recovery phase. But I can tell you that I've seen two initiatives, both community-led. One is a group of individuals that want to get on and invest and grow, expand in local businesses because they're worried about vulture finance. So they want to create their own community funding. Second one I've just seen, and I've just been sent over the weekend, is a community group of leaders outside of council and all the traditional things, getting together, wanting to hold workshops with businesses and other people interested to really start saying, how can we rebuild? And that's a community initiative with no funding, just a group of individuals that are inspired to do this. So I kind of wrap up on that point, because that's really what this is all about. If we do all this wherever we are in the world, we'll be in a good space.
Mark Matthews, your final comment?
Thanks, Victor. I think to Sue's point, I think the businesses have to accept that paradigms have changed. I think that once you accept that there's been a change, then there's a thinking about how. I think reluctantly, everyone wants to quickly go back to the way that they're comfort. They know, and things will be okay because that's what worked in the past. I think we have to collaborate more, and to Paul's point, that aspect of collaboration brings, and the work with communities brings all sorts of ideas, unbeknownst to all of us before you enter into that collaboration space, and then create that stickiness to keep on driving that collaboration and that connection to really empower the communities to implement that change. I think we have to consider the natural, the social, and the human capital. We've all talked about the challenges that we have in building resilience for our future. We have to build strong resilience right across that spectrum. We need greater compassion. We need optimistic leadership, and we need to make sure that we don't dismiss the weird idea because it might be tomorrow's breakthrough solution.
Like the Centre for Optimism, Mark. And Rob Masters, can I ask you to conclude and to thank the panellists and all the attendees?
Yes, thanks, Victor. Look, I think what the key thing couple of key things from where I sit. One is communication, and that takes into account the media. I think what Sally was saying, the media do need to look at themselves, and they do need to actually understand that they can't run news from a news desk anymore. They've got to get out there. And it highlights what Sam was just saying. Regional rural Australia, and Victor and I have been doing some work in this, and I've been doing some other work in it. Regional rural Australia now has an opportunity to actually put itself on the map. And it's getting some traction as far as politics is concerned. It doesn't have as much weight as we would like it to do, but this forum alone is actually highlighting that more and more. So there is an opportunity for regional and rural Australia development. So what does that mean overall? I think these types of forums and your participation in them leads to a lot of optimism as far as the future is concerned. And I think if we can carry our voices into those structures, the political side of things, the media side of things, the business side of things, and the not-for-profit sector, we will have a good voice for the future. And as Mark just said, one that's founded on realistic optimism. So thank you all to the panelists, and thank you all for the participants. It's been a very interesting session. And thank you, Victor.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that marvellous The Better Normal event with the Centre for Optimism. And we'd like to thank all of our panellists and attendees. And we'd love you to be involved in the Centre for Optimism. The website is centreforoptimism.com. There's lots of material there and the opportunity to sign up by way of subscription or membership. And we'd be delighted to have you involved. Have a great day.